Hello, everyone, and welcome at another episode of Global AI Notes. My name is Sami Depre. I'll be your host today, and today we're going to discuss a little bit more about how GitHub is implementing AI and how you, as a software developer, can actually use it. So, if you're interested, stay tuned. And just as every week, we have a special guest, and today we invited Yasir from GitHub. Hi, Yasir. Good morning to you.
Hey, how you doing, Sammy?
I'm doing well. I'm very glad to have you on the show today. It's the first time we have someone from GitHub, so that's exciting.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can you please introduce yourself, Yasir? Who are you? Where are you located? And what's your day-to-day job at GitHub?
Perfect. Yeah, I'm a principal solutions engineer in GitHub. I work with our financial services, healthcare, and regulated industries, manufacturing in GitHub. So we basically help them implement GitHub. We work on everything from software development basics to DevOps to all the new AI. It's kind of taken over the world for the last 2, 3 years, to be honest. It's become the biggest chunk of our time in our discussions. But we're excited here to continuously see the attention and the impact on developers. And it's really fun to be able to meet, from everything from the front end to the back end to the data teams, everybody, and how they get impacted by software development with AI.
Yeah. Okay, it sounds like a very interesting job, and I can imagine also with with working for GitHub, which also released a very awesome plugin for IDEs that has been used by how many people now already? A couple of million, isn't it?
Oh, we're way past the couple of million. Yeah. I've lost track of the numbers, but it is insane. It keeps growing. Yeah.
Yeah, but at the end, it's I think you'll talk a little bit about that today also, isn't it?
I'm excited, Sammy.
All right. Well, Yasir, I'll give you the platform if you can share your screen, and I'm looking forward to learn more about how generative AI is actually helping software developers.
Appreciate it. All right.
Once you share your screen, I will put it in the stream, and then I will disappear. All right, there you go.
Thanks so much. Perfect. So once again, thanks for the time. My name is Yasir Alibrahem. I'm a principal solutions engineer in GitHub. And today we're talking about the forward-looking impact of generative AI on software development. So I'll go ahead and do a bit of a recap, everything up till today, talk a little bit about the near term, and then discuss some of the exciting research that we're doing internally. But GitHub Copilot is about to hit 3 years old now. As a product, it went from a really exciting experiment to the community, moving on to the business version, and then we actually got to see all the excitement and the interest from developers. And it keeps progressing as the technology itself, from OpenAI and Microsoft's partnership, as that progresses, how the architecture of Copilot and where we can do AI grows. To measure the impacts, I think it's great to start with thinking what developers do. And a typical developer workday, if you're a front engineer, back end engineer, if you're early on in your sprint and you're in ideation all the way to implementation, it varies. We all know that. But we did this research. The paper is called Today Was a Good Day. And I particularly like this paper because it provides you a cohesive, large sample size of developers. There's almost 6,000 responses in this study, and we measured what is a typical good developer workday. And about half that day is actually spent in individual activities. Things like reading or writing code, similar for unit tests and documenting code, and participating in code reviews, debugging, and all the issues that you have to go through to make sure code is maintained and clear. And then you have about 36% when you're collaborating with your team, sync, async, the mentorship programs, and then you spend the rest of the time learning, doing all the admin tasks, taking breaks, all of that. So when we think about where AI has impacted our GitHub Copilot and how it works, as Sami mentioned, it's a extension that works in your IDE. It takes a look at the tabs that you have open, and then basically takes that as a context all the way to a large language model and provides you a synthesized suggestion. In the middle, you could do a lot of functionality to secure it, to make sure it's enterprise ready. And when you think about that, we saw a lot of impact happening in the software development lifecycle in terms of providing you, as a developer, getting all these code suggestions. We've seen the rise of comment-driven development, kind of like test-driven development, but here you're writing comments, you're getting code suggestions, or using those suggestions just as ideation. That was definitely the earlier stage, but as we got more comfortable with the tool, we saw a lot more, debugging, a lot more AI in the code review process, whether it's summarizing a pull request or using AI to read and explain the code in a diff so you can run your review faster. And then all the way to, as the complexity of the task increases, going from refactoring code, translating code between different languages, and all that more advanced kind of work. And what I will say is, one of the great things that happened in the last 2-3 years is this attention to developer productivity. This AI impact propelled a lot of the developers as well as the leaders to try to measure what that impact is. And it's definitely a multifaceted equation. So the SPACE framework is a framework that we recommend. It's a framework that we've seen implemented in multiple studies and multiple enterprises. And it's a multi-dimensional framework. So you have your satisfaction and well-being, you have your performance, you have your activity, communication and collaboration, and efficiency and flow. And you look at these 5 different dimensions and you take them from individuals to teams, even to the systems and tools that we use. So unlike DORA, where DORA is a measure of the systems, you're thinking about just the lead time, mean time to resolution, and thinking about something bigger that takes qualitative data. So when we're trying to think about developer productivity, running these surveys with asking developers what the impact is, because productivity is perceived to a large extent. Asking developers what they care about could be the code review, could be the how well do you collaborate, how much do you help your teammates. All of these metrics have been taken into account. And one of those studies we did is about 2,000 developers. This is very early on. And it studied 2 of those SPACE dimensions. So you have the satisfaction and well-being, you have the efficiency and the flow. What we did see is, you can see the numbers are all in the better side, but the faster with the repetitive tasks, that specific item, we saw there's an almost uniform agreement that generative AI has made a huge impact. And that's something like write a function, write a unit test, write the basic of a class, or something like that. And then one metric that I think is absolutely wonderful is, how much do you feel fulfilled as a developer with your job? And that's about 60% saying, yes, that was great. So that SPACE framework, I think if you're a developer individually, it's great to learn about it because it could help you maybe understand what other developers do, what matters to the similar-minded folks. But also, if you're working in an organization and you're going through generative AI and trying to understand how do we make most use of these tools, it's a good framework to kind of get your own study on. One of the ones that I did see that were pretty well done is Accenture, and it's a study for a few months for about 450 developers with 4 of those SPACE dimensions. And you'll see the tie here is Accenture in this study saw 55% more pull requests. That translated similarly into 50%, sorry, more builds. And that is a huge, massive impact on your your company, your productivity, how fast you're shipping products, how fast you're solving problems. And then all the way to that satisfaction and fulfillment where 90% of developers saying they're more fulfilled. So there's definitely variance in how these tools are being used, and the impact ranges from certain developer to the next, from team to team, and you still have to continue learning how to use them better to get more out of them. Shifting gear a little bit, so we talked about almost 3 years of generative AI. We went from fear into comfort. We went into how do we measure it. Now thinking about going forward in the near term. By near term, I think we're gonna discuss something around maybe a year, because reality is technology is still changing very rapidly. Where we wanna not think too far ahead. We're not thinking a decade. It's still definitely all changing too fast. So within the coming near term, we think about these changes in 3 different buckets. The first one is using retrieval or retrieval augmented generation, where we expand the context of the code and the documentation that Copilot can take a look at from those multiple tabs open in your IDE to knowledge bases. So when you host your code and you host your documentation on github.com, we'll be able to train based on that. And I'll touch a bit more on that. The second is creating custom models. And the third will be expanding beyond the data that you have in github.com itself and providing GitHub Copilot with other systems data that use other engineering systems. All right, we'll start with retrieval. What's being done here is we're providing the ability to index your code and your documentation and create these vector databases, so the large language model can actually take that information into account. The Copilot API is going to be the architecture that basically the data flow that can go ahead and tap into these different knowledge bases. And then as a developer, you'll be able to ask questions similar to what is my deployment strategy. And instead of getting a response from an LLM, a large language model that's pre-trained, could be dated, you're actually getting these updated responses based on your own documentation, based on your own data. So as an example, I did a little recording of this in action, and you will see here, we're in this Shiny Eureka repository. I go to GitHub chat, and I can tell that it's already thinking about this code base. It's also telling me it's indexed, so it's ready for me to start asking questions. And I can ask it something, perhaps I'm going to say, I just joined this application, I just joined this project, I want to onboard. So what is this application? How can I go ahead and run it and go test it out? And here, Copilot is going to go through my index database, supplement, user retrieval augmented generation, and eventually provide me a response where it's private data. It told me exactly from perhaps the README, perhaps other markdown files I've put here. It told me what that application is. So it's a repository, it's a bookstore demo. And then eventually it went down and found the steps so I can execute it, because it's a containerized application. Another benefit in this kind of architecture is that you're going to get references. So as you can see here, we have the Docker file. We perhaps want to look at the license, perhaps want to look at that list of HTML books, and we can go from there. Something else you can do here is maybe you are already part of this project, but you're trying to see how your coworkers are writing unit tests. And you would just ask Copilot, instead of saying, give me unit tests and how to write them, previously, now you're saying, give me how unit tests are written in this specific repository, and you'll get that answer. So one of the major use cases here is developers are going to be able to discover code better. They'll be able to learn the practices of engineering better. And it's also a nudge towards documenting your own practices and helping spread those and maintain a high bar for all those. You'll also be able to see the ability to attach files. So you're attaching context to the large language model. Or if you click on this book icon, you'll see the list of knowledge bases that you've already created. So the admin here has already decided what the knowledge base includes. So in here we see a list. For example, we have the GitHub Advanced Security, the GitHub Engineering, and then another example would be GitHub's design system or primer. And I can go ahead and attach it. You'll see now the chat actually includes these 4 different repositories that make up the knowledge base. And I can ask it something like, how do I create a React button or a React link, or you name the components, and how do I do that for my specific implementation of my design system? And of course, Copilot is going to take all these 4 repositories, augment the LLM, and provide me the answer that I'm looking for. There's a massive use case here. I think it's a really good point for if you're running any sort of transformational changes in your repository and you're in a point of time to do better code reuse, this would be a perfect time to enable these kind of indexed repositories so developers can start to clean up code and actually build up a lot more of the inner sourcing culture. What you're going to end up here with is that Copilot chat matches your private repositories, the code and documentation, takes the question, of course, the context that you've given the chat prompt. And then we're also working on indexing a large group of public repositories so that maybe those will come in handy in your knowledge base. Like in this primary example, it could have been helpful to actually include the React library itself, the framework, and maybe that could have increased the quality of the suggestion that I get towards the end. Towards the end of the year, we're also talking about these integrations, and that could also be taken as other sources of data within this one big retrieval augmented generation powered context. All right, the next bucket we see coming in the next year is creating these custom models. So the use cases here, you might not need a custom model, but the use case is if you're writing with programming languages, writing code with languages that are not very much represented in the current public data. They could be proprietary, they could be older. Maybe you're using some SDKs or APIs or internal tools that you've built that also the foundational models that the big large language models have not been pre-trained on, so they're not really aware of and they're not that efficient. And in that case, what you want to do is you want to fine-tune that LLM and create a custom model. You would deploy it. It'd be private to your own enterprise and organization. But that model would solve that problem because now it's aware of this other context to train on. I think another really powerful use case is if you want to get suggestions that match the style and syntax of your own code, but more importantly, perhaps you train and you fine-tune the model based on newer repositories or repositories that are representing your best work. So you've paid attention to the quality of the code, resolved a lot of the vulnerabilities, just documented them very well, paid attention to the style and syntax. You could nudge the model with that kind of information so that suggestions will be closer to that style going forward. Instead of just training on, for example, all your data and all your code, which can be very outdated. And then the final bit we're discussing here on the extensibility story is the fact that we're expanding the scope of the data that Copilot can integrate into its own workflow. I think to me that's personally the most exciting because now we're creating this pipeline where GitHub Copilot can be your core pipeline where you pull in all the plugins and all the systems that you use. It's a good vision to work towards. This is slated for end of 2024 or early 2025. But what these integrations are going to look like is we're introducing two concepts: skills first, the second is agents. In this Copilot API, the central, the pipeline, the data flow, we can send API queries to other systems. So some of them are going to be first party. For example, maybe you're asking Copilot to create an issue or to summarize a chunk of text or a pull request. So they're very much a one function type of integration. And then if you want to allow the integrator more power, so they can say it's not simply query data, get a response back, but you want to orchestrate a set of operations, we're introducing the concept of agents for other solutions to build on top of GitHub Copilot. Similarly, you could have first party as in Copilot's own agents, or we're opening that door for any other third party maybe later. Show you what that looks like. And here we have a developer and they're working on this Python chunk of code, and they're wondering perhaps what is the performance of this query. So at this point in time, you would go ahead to DataStax and you would maybe get some metrics and telemetry of, how does it perform out there? What's your P50, P75? And whoops, there we go. And you get that response right there in your data pipeline. But even better, that can be used to retrieve with the base LLM, with the foundation model. Other examples are maybe you haven't, you forgot what this feature flag is. Is it turned on? Is it turned off? So you lean on launch darkly, just get that answer directly. Tells you perhaps, yep, that is partially enabled so far, 20%. Or maybe you're looking at Postman. So you've updated a implementation of an API. You're asking Postman, does it match the actual documentation that we have out there? And it'll tell you. So lots of integrations. It's an early on program still because we have a few months to work towards the GA of that. But you can see here some of the third-party integrations possibly coming, something all the way towards the end of the life cycle of an application, monitoring with Datadog, New Relic, HashiCorp, Pulumi, infrastructure as code, a lot of security solutions like Endor Labs or Noise Secure for mobile, testing with Tricentis, and you'll see a lot of the programs come into clarity as the year comes on. One more note here, we did talk about GitHub Copilot and talk about all these different buckets of, they're really going to change how developers work and how fast you can execute your functions, and perhaps increase the code review process, perhaps help you increase the code quality, as now developers don't have to spend more effort and switch context to get the information they need. But the last mention is using AI for security. So if you're, one of the other features that are coming is called Autofix. It's really exciting, but basically instead of only detecting vulnerabilities in code, tools, so you have CodeQL, which is GitHub's static analysis engine. Instead of just detecting there's a vulnerability, for example, uncontrolled data used in this path expression, it could actually use AI to look at generating a fix. Now, this is a suggestion. So, as a developer, you could accept it, commit the fix, or you could go ahead and pull that recommended diff and actually edit it so that it matches the right state that you're looking for. But it's very exciting because I think this kind of work where we get the beginning stages of fixing vulnerabilities or writing code through AI, it's easier for developers to edit an existing chunk of code versus trying to create everything from start. Another use case in security is using AI to detect secrets. So definitely we want to prevent tokens and API keys and SSH keys from getting into the repository itself. And when that happens, AI can help you maybe detect those with higher accuracy. So excited about that as well. The final bit that I really like to talk on today is research. So GitHub's own research team is called GitHub Next. Really brilliant set of folks here. They also participated in the early experiments to get Copilot as a product out there. And a lot of the projects that they do are the very long-term vision of software development, very broad space, and then they're experimental. That's the team's role. So the experiments they do might not materialize into a product, but they're available for everyone to learn about, take a look into. And the three that's looking into what could be coming beyond the near-term features that I want to touch on. We have these Copilot workspace. It's an experiment of how do you bridge GitHub issues towards a actual pull request. So if you look at this video here, what's happening, you have this application, you have a bunch of logos, and you could go ahead and maybe make some edits by opening a workspace in here. And once you do that, you open the workspace, you ask Copilot your query. So you're saying, is the GitHub handle displayed on each gallery cell? And at this point, what's going to happen is it'll write a spec of the current state and the proposed state. You can edit that, so you can collaborate with it. And it'll also take that little the specification that it made and also put it into a plan. And you can also edit the plan. Now, once that plan is ready, you can press implement, and it'll go ahead and implement the code, deploy and build and deploy the code on a workspace, on a code space, and eventually show you the changes that you're asking to make. And you can go back and forth, so you can see the application. Maybe you want to make another edit, and you can go back to the spec and edit the plan, or you can just change the code and it will continuously work with you. So it's a really interesting way of expanding the depth of the breadth, of where do we use AI to this early on architecture ideation. Another experiment that I think is absolutely very exciting is using natural language to write software. So we're leaning more on trusting AI to do more of the work. And I don't think it's a nudge towards a fully no-code world yet, but it definitely takes another layer of abstraction. In here, we have a demo of building a React-based news application. So within one command line, we'll see here. So let me just zoom forward a little bit. Yep. So we got speclang, create mobile, spec news, and then you provide the application name. So you're building this app, this mobile app, to get hacker news out there, and you're letting Copilot or the AI basically build the entire application. So it'll build a spec out of it. It'll go ahead, write the code, create the files, and also run the application. So just zooming forward a little bit, you have this application ready with Xcode. It's built with a lot of React. So going forward, you see the tree and you see the JavaScript files there. And as you want to make changes, you would go ahead and open the spec file that was described, and you can make and edit changes there and ask speclang to make those edits. So pretty exciting. And I think these two experiments are big picture thinking. The third one is called Next Edit Suggestions. But the idea here is today, Copilot provides you a suggestion to a problem you're asking it to do. And for example, if we take a look at a class definition, it has a string, question, and answer points, and then a set of examples of that class. And if we take a look at NES, what's going to happen is as you make changes and accept those suggestions, Copilot will suggest the next edit for you to make. As in, we added a point here. I should probably add a point to each of my sample questions. So it does its own flow to go from one task to an actual multi-step implementation, how that changes your code. That's all I had for today. Thanks so much for the time.
That was a very interesting session. I had no idea that you guys were developing these kind of things next to what GitHub Copilot already does. But how new is this? This news, because I haven't seen anything passing by with these things.
Yeah. So the three buckets we discussed today, Sami, these are being bundled under a Copilot Enterprise offering. This was made, I believe, February 27. But as you kind of saw, like the first part, the RAG with your own code and your own documentation is ready today. Towards the end of the year, you'll get the retrieval with other systems. There's a lot more work to build up there. And towards the middle of the year, you have the custom models. Yeah.
It looks really cool what you guys are building there. I'm excited to start using it. It already helps so many people in development, and I can imagine by bringing, for example, your own documentation or the analysis that you did to build your application, then it can actually help you even more. So I'll still give a couple of minutes for the guests. We have quite some people watching right now live. If you have any questions for Yasir, this is your chance. Use the comment section or the chat section on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, or on X, and we can ask the question right now. So we'll just give them a little bit of time. So that's all going to be for GitHub Enterprise, right?
Those three buckets, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the state.
I think many people will also ask, and I know there's many people still scared of using this generative AI and sending all my data, also my code, which might be IP, to you guys, because at the end it goes to you. What is your privacy policy about that?
Yeah, I mean, the architecture of Copilot, the business and enterprise doesn't retrain, doesn't learn from the code that you've done there. When we get to the custom models and index in the databases, it does mean you have to build deeper trust with GitHub because we're storing those databases, right? But it's not like retraining the foundational model based on your own data. That's all separate.
All right, cool. Which is, well, important, of course, for IP. Again, you don't want to share other one's code into another one's application. Okay, seems like we do not have any questions coming in, which is of course no problem. It was a very to-the-point session, just like we like them. Yasir, thank you very much for making time for us. We really appreciate it. We're looking forward to the next releases of GitHub Enterprise, so we can actually start playing with this.
Great.
All the new things that you're showing us. So, Yasir, thank you very much. All of you who are watching live right now, thank you very much for joining the Global AI Notes, and hope to see you next week again for another episode. Bye-bye, everyone.